Good afternoon, LEC community. My name is Edgar Palacios, the founder of the Latinx Education Collaborative. Thank you for joining us again for another round of Ask an Educator. I'm here with our wonderful Chief Community Officer, Susana Elizarraz. Susana, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm well. How are you, Edgar?
You know, I think it's Thursday, so I think this is a win. I think we're headed towards the end of the week. I'm not sure. Got to see you. We did some phenomenal work this week that maybe we'll talk about later in the broadcast. I'm not sure. But I am so thrilled to have a phenomenal educator with us, Justin Lopez-Cardoze. Did I pronounce that right, first and foremost? You can correct me.
It works.
Hopefully I got the first two right.
Yeah.
Anyways, Justin, how are you doing? And welcome.
I'm doing well. Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be here and excited to engage in our time in conversation today.
Well, we so appreciate you being here and taking some time to share with us a little bit about your journey and experience as an educator. You have a lot of awesome stories, I can tell, and I bet. So let's just kind of start there. Tell us a little bit, for those of us that don't know you, tell us a little bit about who you are.
Sure. Well, I currently teach 7th grade science at Capital City Public Charter School in Washington, D.C., actually going into my 5th year of being at the school and my 9th year as a teacher. And so my life started in Durham, North Carolina. So I come from a family, a mixed family. So my mom is white and my dad is from El Salvador. So he immigrated from El Salvador in the 1980s. And, many of the trials and tribulations that he went through in order to establish his life here brought about many, domestic challenges that we faced growing up that I really couldn't understand. And now being in education and having grown up and really understood the experience of a Latinx immigrant has really shaped how I view my identity and how I orient myself into my educational landscape. And so, yeah, I mean, I love education. I live, breathe, and sleep education. And, I find such a pride in being a Latinx teacher in DC.
I have a lot of questions about DC. We hear a lot of stories from DC in terms of education.
Mm-hmm.
But before we even get into all that, what made you decide to become an educator? What was your path like into that space?
Wow. So what really inspired me to get into education stems from the experiences that I went through in college. So when I was attending the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill and became a teaching assistant for a chemistry lab, I really started understanding the power of how to facilitate instruction and how to be inspirational. And there were students who I could identify with very easily, and to see that from my experiences growing up, that there were deficits that allowed a collegiate experience to bring many more challenges, feeling like, all right, I've got this, I've gone through high school, I've gotten my good grades, and then I go into college and I'm like, was I really prepared? Was I really pushed the way that I needed to be pushed? And so I wanted to address those deficits and to be a part of a network that elevated public education, and to contribute, what I could bring to the table, and to also join a collective movement and ensuring that the educational experiences for all students continuously became maximized by passionate educators and by folks who work relentlessly to support all students, namely Black and Latinx students. And so, yeah, that's what really motivated me into to going into teaching. And then a couple of years into teaching, I decided to move to an area of the country where I felt like there was an element of social justice engraved in the locations in the location. And so I was debating between Philly and DC, and I selected DC, and here I am.
So your path into education really was from seeing the deficits that were happening in public education. Okay, so now almost a decade into it, looking back, how do you feel about the fulfillment of your mission walking into it, or like your interactions with your students and your families? Like, where do you get fed these days? Because we know the average teacher stays in the classroom for 5 years. You are now almost double that. So how do you get fed?
What an amazing question. So who feeds me? Who feeds me? It is the community. When I first got into teaching, I really saw myself, I don't want to say in isolation of who I was serving or who I was collaborating with, but as soon as I changed my focus on the community, getting to know the assets of the community, getting to figure out what is my role in being a part of the community and helping to support it in areas that the community would value progressive shifts. And so who keeps feeding me? Honestly, it ultimately comes back to my students and my parents or guardians. They are the ones who, through the obstacles of, the time-sensitive deadlines and the lesson planning and the grading and the additional challenges that come with teaching, as we know, really stems from their support and feeling valued as a family member of this community. And so I've described to my head of school, using the language, this is my home school. This feels like a home. And for me, that's what keeps me coming back, is that my students and my families have made me feel like I'm at home.
I celebrate that. You mentioned the word isolation. Something that we're trying to combat as an organization is a feeling of isolation that a lot of our Latinx educators feel in the building. As you know, the data show that I think 8 to 9% of all educators in the country identify as Latinx, which is considerably a lower amount than the number of students who identify the same. And so I think that that's a lot. Seeing you and seeing you reflected and represented in these spaces is so important to the mission of our organization, and it's so important to the overall outcomes of our students. And so I'm glad that you've stuck it out a little bit, not a little bit, a lot of it, and that you'll continue to do so. I'll be remiss if I don't acknowledge the Amplify shirt that you're wearing. Because Amplify is a conference that's located here in Kansas City that celebrates educators of color. So I think we first met you at Amplify this year. I'd love for you to talk a little bit about your experience. So you actually showed up to the LEC Amplify X kind of half day session that we did. What were your takeaways from that specifically? What did it feel like to be in that room? And be brutally honest. If it was terrible, let us know as well.
Yeah, so I'm going to try to maintain my emotions here, because I was actually just talking to my husband about the experience of being a part of that segment of the conference. So I had never up to that point had experienced the being in a room full of educators who identify as Latinx ever. And so I've been in spaces where, we have been present. I've been in spaces with teachers and educational leaders who identify as POC, people of color, but I have not been in a room with Latinx educators, period, with that many. Latinx educators. And so when I remember first walking into the room, not feeling overwhelmed, but just feeling like this is a very foreign feeling to me, because I'm feeling like I'm already feeling a sense of camaraderie, hearing everyone's perspectives. And, for me and my identity, being someone who identifies as multiracial, I am aware of being a white presenting Latinx member of our community. And so for me, I have endured many circumstances that have placed me in a position where, if I am working with predominantly white folks, for example, I have felt the tensions of, an undermining of my Latinx identity in those spaces professionally and personally before. And then being in Latinx spaces sometimes has been uncomfortable because who is this, colonizer presenting? But I mean, it's something that it has been internalized in me for a very long time. And so when I was in that room, I felt embraced, I felt honored, I felt respected, I felt listened to. And I walked out feeling a different sense of what my role should be as a Latinx educator. So being as someone who identifies as multiracial, I have a unique power to exercise my solidarity of being a Latinx member of the community, while also amplifying my allyship as someone who is white presenting. So I have two sides of the coin to work here, and bringing both of those elements into working towards anti-racism and working towards liberation for Latinx youth and families and our community at large. And so when you say go hard and be brutally honest, my feedback is only affirmative. And I strongly recommend anyone who is feeling either like they're in isolation based off of their Latinx identity, or if they feel like they've had, the privilege of working with a collective group of Latinx educators to promote empowerment of our voice and of our presence in education. I think that conferences like the ones that were facilitated at Amplify KC through the LEC was phenomenal. And those are my experiences. That's what I took away.
Justin, that means so much more than you know. It was the first time that we had done Amplify X, and it was the first time Edgar and I had, I guess, like in that more like academic setting. It was the first time we had done something like that was like almost a day long, right? So I guess I'll speak for myself. I was really nervous leading up to it. And as you know, and something that we hit hard yesterday in one of our equity trainings is that Latinos are not a monolith, right? Like there is this spectrum of beauty in our community. And so Edgar and I, when planning it with our committee, we were like, let's make sure that this day does not feel like everyone's in a box. Like here's what a Latino is. A Latino has to speak Spanish. A Latino looks like this. Like we wanted to make sure that the spectrum of the variety of colors and languages and hair textures and areas of the country that people are from, areas of the world that people are from, was recognized, honored, and really amplified. I mean, not to, no pun intended, right? To be amplified.
I love that. I love that marketing connection there. Just real quickly, want to welcome Laura Forrest to the conversation. That's amazing. I wish that we could make my school feel like home. My students definitely help, but staff coworkers not so much. I think we'll ask you to address that, but just quickly want to acknowledge that at the end of last year, Laura was actually our Future Educator of the Year. She won the award. She was nominated by a couple of folks, and so just grateful to have her as part of the community. Have you ever navigated difficult environments in your decade of teaching?
Yes, I have. So mainly with my experiences working in one particular institution, where there was a lot of decisions being made from our administration that were not the result of eliciting teacher response, teacher feedback. Many of the decisions that were made were either through our administration or through our district that we didn't necessarily agree with. And when we did, or we tried to offer constructive feedback or, ideas that could elevate the decisions that were being made, we didn't feel valued in our role. And so to me, more than ever, I think that is incredibly important right now, is to elicit the perspectives and perceptions of teachers, given our current landscape of enduring through the literal and organizational deficit of humanity at the hands of COVID-19. Teachers have firsthand experience of what it takes to facilitate instruction given our compromised resources. We have an understanding of what works and what doesn't. And so now more than ever, especially for Latinx educators and or immigrant educators, our time now is to ensure that we are preventing the broadening of the opportunity gap for our Latinx youth. Translation is not enough. It is not about just translation. And as Susana mentioned, the Latinx identity is not a monolith. Even through translation is not a monolith, right? And many folks do not understand this. Many folks who aren't, either close allies with our community or who aren't in our community have a very difficult time grasping that, because many of the ways that, we involve, decisions that are coming from teachers are unfortunately upholding to white supremacy and to the feelings that comfort affluent populations. And so with those tensions, for me, I was very transparent and making sure that before I ended up ultimately leaving that district, and that, it's an issue beyond equity. When you choose not to leverage teacher expertise and teacher voice, then you are preventing the liberation of all students, but especially traditional marginalized students, be it Black, African American, or Latinx students. So that's my perspective there.
What do you find in your current situation? Sounds like you're having a more positive situation lately, and I applaud that. That must feel really good. What is something that your current situation or district does to support you, or some successes you've found recently?
Absolutely. So I am beyond happy, lucky, and privileged to work at an institution such as Capital City Public Charter School. And I can speak on behalf of the middle school because that is the experience that I have the most from our senior leadership team and from our middle school administration team. They make it a priority to not involve teachers across difference, especially teachers across difference. They don't view it as, okay, checkbox, we included you in a conversation, we did it. It isn't like that. There's strong evidence that is teacher facing that supports that our institution is really leveraging our voice and our expertise through our current situation. And they have been doing this pre-COVID-19. But one of the things that I'm genuinely proud of our institution is that we have a well-invested family engagement team. And I in conversations that I've had with folks about family engagement. The mindset that our institution has is not allowing the term engagement to be limiting. I view it more as family involvement. So what does family involvement look like effectively? What does it mean for our families to have a voice at the table when we're making decisions? When are they attending for example, our team meetings, our equity core committee team meetings? When are they, and how are they supporting teachers? How are we able to collaborate with them effectively? And I have found that with this team, they have been responsive to our Latinx families, and thinking about, all right, where do our families live? Where are they from? How do they identify? What is their dialect, right? What are their expectations for their students? And how do these expectations differ from other family perspectives that, are coming from, for example, Black or African-American families, or from white families? We really take a differentiated approach in ensuring that we are being responsive culturally to our families and to our students, especially at this time.
I think you also have the honor, correct me if I'm wrong, of being DC Teacher of the Year 2020. Is that correct?
I
Am I
am
mistaken on
the
that?
2020 DC State Teacher of the Year and the first Latinx educator to receive this honor in DC's history. So that's something that I proudly share, and has allowed me to really to elevate my passion work in honoring and supporting the Latinx community within our landscape. And so, yeah, that's correct.
What's that experience like? What is it like to be deemed Teacher of the Year?
It's humbling. It's a role that by title comes off as, person centric, where, you've got this teacher, and the teacher has, their own strategies and ways of fostering community outreach, and pretty much building their own responsibilities. And that's never how I have seen my role, ever. For me, it is about serving as an ambassador for teachers across the district, and also thinking about how I can collaborate across the country and even across our United States territories to bring my passion work to the table, utilizing the voices of teachers in DC. So recently, I had the opportunity to speak with DC's mayor, so Mayor Muriel Bowser. And I requested that meeting because I wanted to bring perspectives from other teachers and other stakeholders into the community on how to resolve the tensions that many teachers in our district have faced within, how are we being protected? How are we being supported? Ultimately to meet the needs of our students and our families, but really to put our health and to put our wellness into the picture. And so for me, that having that meeting with the mayor, and acting as a voice of literally thousands of teachers, is like for me, a success story. I hope to continue different initiatives within DC. But for me, I brought to the mayor that there is a lack of leveraging immigrant educators during this time, and that the inequities that have arisen further due to distance learning have hit our Latinx populations super hard, and to figure out ways systemically to avoid these inequities from getting larger and to ultimately eradicate them. And so I hope to continue doing this work and reaching out to policymakers and our local leadership, and acting as that teacher ambassador in this role.
DC is no stranger to, at least nationally, if you didn't know, we get lots of news out of DC when it comes to equity, and the Black Lives Matter movement has been a huge deal in DC. Have you gotten any insight from students, former students or current students, about the tensions? Whether they agree or disagree is not a thing, is not the point, right? It's like, how do they feel about the tensions there, and about how the mayor is handling everything and all of that?
Yeah, so we really wanted to make sure that we were allowing students to be a part of the movement virtually and safely at this time. So one of the things, a phenomenal educator who was also at Amplify KC, Sarah Cole, who was our 5th grade humanities teacher, created an initiative for our school for students in particular to submit photos and to initiate a photo campaign where students were saying Black Lives Matter because, and then they would fill in the blank. And it was really in an effort to make sure that the element of defunding our police had reason and value coming from students, and that it wasn't, for example, something that was cute. It wasn't something that was like, oh, look at our students advocating and being activists, in a way that undermines their power. And so we had the opportunity to initiate a photo campaign and to learn students' perspectives on why they are placing the Black Lives Movement first, and really operating as agents to support and defend the Black community at this time. And so I think it's really important that we don't put an age or a restriction on activism and advocacy, because our students are in many ways our best teachers, and we can learn a lot from them. I know that I can say that, and that they're handling this situation, whether, regardless of how they identify, as folks who are not only aware of, everything that is happening in our country, whether that is police brutality or innocent Black lives being lost at the hand of white supremacy or institutions that uphold white supremacy. But they act as active members to be a part of the movement.
I appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's always important. So I know now we're actually just talking about this afternoon, where it is interesting within our community how it can feel divisive sometimes, right? By us being pro-Black and anti-racist as a Latinx organization. And I use that in quotations because I think we also have to acknowledge that I think 25% of all Latinos also identify as Black. And so the Latinx identity is multiracial in that sense. It's just so important that, we continue to message and continue to stand in with that belief and in that truth that all lives don't matter until Black lives matter, right? And take whatever hits we're going to take because of that, but also be unabashed and really affirming in that situation, because we're never going to reach equity, we're never going to reach equality if we don't proactively talk about these issues within our own community and address them from the get-go. Having said that, I'm going to step away. Justin, I'm so grateful that you're here with us today. Susanna's going to take great care of you, of course. And so I will see everybody later this week, maybe.
Thank you, Edgar.
Thank you.
Well, I mean, everything you've said has obviously resonated. I think when you and I met, we were just speaking the same language right off the bat. It was like it literally was like we were family. Like we were reconnecting or something. Somehow we had already touched base with each other. And something that you mentioned a couple times that I would love to hear your insight or more insight about is you've talked about the liberation of the Latinx community. And it's something that it's a term actually that probably this year is the first time I have heard it. It's like not just dismantling systems, not just fighting for equal rights and equity. It's liberation of our community. Tell us more about what that means, really, just maybe in general, and then what it means to you as a teacher in the classroom.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, I personally believe that the term equity has been diluted by many folks, within our community of education and even in the community at large. We typically view equity as fairness, right? Like, given my identity, given my levels of privilege and my levels of oppression, what services will I be receiving in order to make sure that I have an equal access to opportunity as folks who vary across differences in race, differences in oppressions, differences in privileges, what systems and who is going to lead this equity in responding to the factors that are hindering us from true liberation. So for me, I view equity as responding to the systems and structures that are corrupted by white supremacy, more specifically patriarchal, cis-favored. We talk about every identity marker under the rainbow, right? And which factors are hindering those folks who do not fit societal's quote unquote norms. How are we getting rid of all of those factors that are hindering us for reaching that liberation? So to me, liberation means, yes, we're going to be equitable, but while we are creating systems and structures that are going to place everyone on an equal playing field of opportunity, let's also make sure that we are creating systems and structures that are destroying those factors that are hindering what true liberation means, right? Where everyone, regardless of race, gender, sexual orientation, religion, ability, socioeconomic status, etc., we all have the opportunity to reach our full potential without any hindrances getting in the way. That's my interpretation of the differences between equity and liberation. Equity, you're not taking into consideration necessarily of actively dismantling systems and structures that are corrupted by white supremacy. And that is why I have been learning the virtues and the true essence of what it means to work towards anti-racism. I didn't hear the term anti-racism really until a couple of years ago. And for me, I just wondered why, it's a new term. It's something that I need to learn more about. And now I truly understand why the presence of anti-racism and how words matter should really manifest throughout our educational landscape. So for me, what does liberation look like in the classroom? And so it's a balance of, like I said, providing those services that places, Latinx students, into a position of reaching their full opportunity, while dismantling those systems and structures that are hindering them. So an example of this would be, I want to
maybe tracking into the ELL system, maybe?
Say that one more time.
Tracking into the ELL system, like tracking students.
Yep.
That's one example off the top of my head, right?
Yeah, and then for me, let's see, for making sure that we're liberating Latinx students is that we are allowing them to have roles in the classroom that aren't trivial, and I'm thinking in terms of, being in a traditional setting, but making sure that the roles and the leadership responsibilities that we assign to our Latinx students are meaningful and that they are rigorous, and that other students are seeing us as true leaders of content that matters. So one of the activities that I did with my students this summer for our STEM program is that I forced every single student to find a scientist, a technology expert, an engineer, or a mathematician who looked like them in race and in gender. And I wanted them to do research on them and to know that this is what STEM looks like. STEM does not have one single look. STEM does not have a look that doesn't look like you. You have someone in the community that represents you, and it's up to you to ensure that you embrace that and to know that you have worth and that you have power as a STEM leader in our community.
Yeah, and I think that gives students the opportunity to see that as a possibility for their lives, right? Because when they don't see themselves represented in careers, in the media, in in movies, it means to us, hey, that's not for me. What I think about also in terms of liberation and anti-racism, because I think liberation and anti-racism right now feel very extremist, like feel very radical, right? I just read an article recently where it was like, well, Ibram Kendi's book is like too radical. Like we shouldn't even be striving to be anti-racist yet because we can't even stop people from saying I'm not racist, right? And Ibram Kendi in his book says you saying you're not racist is racist because really, if you're not anti-racist, you're a racist. And I think a part of me loves where we're going with like anti-racism and liberation being terms in the same kind of world but there's still like, I feel discouraged sometimes when then there are people who are like, oh, that's like too radical, like God forbid we all go toward like being against the racists, right? Like it's not just like we're not racist, but like if you're at the store or if you're participating in a system that's perpetuating racism, I think it'd be pretty appropriate for you to say, hey, you're being, but I think as a society, we are like in this spectrum between racist and anti-racist. We're still like here, right? Like
Yes.
we're not even close to admitting like we all need to be anti-racist. Hold up,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I hear you on that. For me, there's nothing more radical than innocent Black lives being murdered at the hands of white supremacy and police brutality. What's radical to me is that Breonna Taylor's murderers are still out there and the case hasn't opened yet the way that it needs to. What's radical to me is that this has been an ongoing issue for years and years and years in our American history. And what's radical to me is that we have tried to, enforce our leadership, whether it's our politicians or our litigators, but we've tried to hold them accountable, and yet there are still loopholes in the system that still accommodate white supremacists and racists. That is radical to me, and so I definitely understand that. Yeah, and I agree with you. We're still, as a society, in a place where we're in the middle of that. Are we truly ready to embrace the term anti-racism and truly be about it? Again, it goes back to, accommodating the feelings of folks who either one, don't understand it, or two, refuse to understand it. So
well, and that in and of itself is a characteristic of white supremacy, right? Is like making sure that we're coddling the feelings of the people who are perpetuating those systems, right? Like, well, I don't want to call that person racist because then it's going to hurt their feelings. It's like, okay, but if they're perpetuating systems of racism, and more so it's impacting kids and youth, or innocent lives, like we should have the right to say, right?
Yes.
I think when you and I talked before, it obviously wasn't like on live. We're like, but we could we got into it and we got deep. And
very emotional, very quickly.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. It was a little piece of liberation, I think, for the year. And I was coming from a place as well where the system in which I it have existed in for really my whole life. It never felt like I could approach kids and youth and students with, hey, let's look at anti-racism.
Yeah.
You know, like that was extremist and that was radical in the systems that I was used to being in, and not just as a teacher, but like the university space and like me as a student. Like I felt like that was something that couldn't be touched. Do you feel as a teacher the agency to be able to have these anti-racist conversations? And like I said, you know, feel free to share as much or as little as you want, but I'm interested to know.
So agency, for me, a part about the reason why I wanted to move to an area of the country where I felt like social justice was at the center, or what equity really means was at the center. The reason why I wanted to be a part of this community ultimately in DC was because I knew that my perspectives and my voice on prioritizing, supporting, defending, and honoring traditionally marginalized, and I say I emphasize racially marginalized students, I would be able to practice that being an unapologetic member of my community, both at Capital City and within DC. So I already felt like I could have that, the power to do that, and the autonomy. There we go, the autonomy to practice that in my own classroom. And it's more than just having that self-comfort. It is my institutional comfort that I have. So I have an institution, I'm a part of an institution that is very, very clear on our expectations, on how we are operating as leaders of change, most notably being leaders who are supporting and honoring Black students at this point in time, especially at this point in time. And we always have, but to really make sure that we are, as a community, doing our part in our skin and our gender and every identity marker under the rainbow to elevate our allyship and solidarity, depending on how we identify, to foster and work towards anti-racism in our school and community at large. So I feel that autonomy, but I also interrogate districts outside of DC and outside of my institution. I question why there is hesitation. And I don't personally question it. It's more of like a probing. I want folks to question, why is there hesitation?
Right. And I think about how, I mean, like the way you describe the autonomy is the right word. The autonomy that you have to address these issues with your students, with your coworkers, is not valued everywhere in our school system. If anything, it can sometimes be targeted, like negatively, you know, because people are afraid of change. People are afraid of not leaning toward, like you said, the norm, especially when we do work in a white dominant field. And people haven't, there's some people that haven't done that identity work or aren't interested in doing that identity work. So look, I could go on and on, but I do want to talk about what you and I connected on at Amplify. Was the question, it was about a woman in our lives, right? Was it about a woman in our lives?
It was about an ancestor.
An ancestor. An ancestor in our lives who we wanted to tap into as energy for our, like, you know, moving forward, right? And I think that's unique that's the unique space that Amplify and Amplify X provides for educators, because whenever do you get the opportunity to even be posed a question like that, and then to talk to an educator like yourself about the question, especially because that conference is geared toward people of color. And so when we talk our indigenous communities, our ancestors, there's so much beautiful history to be told. Do you mind sharing at least a little bit of what you shared that day?
Yeah, no, not a problem. And I mean, like I said, this is an experience that I commonly go back to when thinking about, having the opportunity to be a part of Amplify X and Amplify KC. So I decided to choose my father, although he is not an ancestor yet. At the time that we were talking, my father has been in pretty bad health for the past couple of years, and I began thinking about, what do I want to do now with him, and rebuilding my relationship with him, and continually, striving to make amends, and to really understand his perspective, not only as my father, but as someone who immigrated to this country and has firsthand experience of truly understanding the oppressions that undocumented immigrants face. And I know that times have changed and the oppressions have changed, but when he came here in the 1980s, escaping the guerrilla wars that were happening in El Salvador, what did he learn from the sacrifices that he made in leaving his family? What did he learn in the sacrifices of supporting financially, and even as a father, myself and my brother, and my mother? I want to know what I can do to I want to know what I can do to carry on his legacy that he carried with him when he decided to immigrate to the United States. I want to make sure that in my future children's generation, that I'm passing on what he holds pride in. And I want to also make sure that as an educator, what assets does he bring in his identity? And how can I make sure that they become more engraved in my practices? Because despite the hardships that our family went through, because in full transparency, my father could not handle it, and I didn't know that he couldn't handle it, and he developed, an addiction to alcohol. And that brought about many, many challenges in our household. And I resented him for a long time because I did not understand the why behind it. And now that I do, and now that I have allowed myself to forgive that, I have been able to appreciate him, and to appreciate his identity as a Salvadoreño. And I just want to make sure that his legacy lives on when he does leave, through me.
That is so powerful. I really appreciate you sharing. I didn't mean to put you on the spot if you didn't want to share that. It stuck. Our interaction stuck with me, and thinking about our ancestors. And actually, we didn't get a chance to talk for very long, unfortunately, because it was like 2 minutes you, 2 minutes you, and then it was we cried, and
it's time to move on to another
session, and we're like crying. But the story you share is a story that I can relate to, actually, with my father. And I think as educators, being able to tap into that part of our identity, and that part of our like internal struggle, so that kids know and can liberate and honor them, like themselves and their past and the situations they're in now, because they're kids and they're youth, right? And so they're in the situations that we were struggling to understand when we were kids, right? So just as educators, to be able to go through experiences like that, like where you and I sat across from each other and just like, okay, it's time to forgive, it's time to honor, it's time to, dissect and understand.
Liberation. To
Yes.
me, that felt like liberation.
Yes. I'll share a little bit about what I had shared. I shared about how patriarchy and my family had really taken a toll, or had taken control and taken charge of the women in my family. And I talked about my grandmas, one of my grandmas, I think I mentioned my grandma who was suffering from dementia. She passed away in March. And just, I mean, it's obvious why we cried now, right? Because thinking about how the men, and not to, like you said, not to downplay the struggles and the hardships and the like downright work and sacrifice that the men in my family and in our families have made, because there's so much value, and that should be honored as well. But my mindset at the time was around how patriarchy had meant that the women in my life had given up a lot of their dreams and all of that because of the culture. So anyway, I bring that up because I think as educators, to be in a same room together, to have an experience like that where you can dissect a little part of your identity and almost like forgive that child that's still in you, so that like forgive the child, and also like equip the child too. Like, it's cool, we can move on, because when we're in front of our kids, that's who they are right now, right? So anyway, what are you looking forward to in 2020, 2021? Yes, we're embarking on a very unique year, a very unprecedented and unsure. I mean, there's still things we have no idea about, right? So what is your school district decided, and what is your job going to look like coming up, and what are you excited for?
Yeah, so my school, well, I'll say for the district first, because I'm a part of our charter network in DC. But our district, so DCPS has decided to be fully virtual until at least November 9th, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but it's definitely early November. And then my school, being in the charter, we've decided to be completely virtual as well, at least until November 9th. And so I haven't even gone into my, I guess, pre-service PD. Like, I haven't gone into our summer PD preparing us for the year yet. I've been lucky to be a part of many focus groups that have happened this summer that our administration has hosted, just to figure out what the logistics will look like, what culture will look like, and how we're going to be prioritizing student SEL, adult SEL, etc. What I am looking forward to the most, is being a teacher. And I know that, this is something that is, what you've been into. You're going into your 9th year of teaching. This is my first year starting virtually. So I'm learning everything new. And, I'm looking forward to how I can leave a footprint on transferring what I'm confident in into my practice and inspiring others. I'm also looking forward to learning, and then being in my role as the 2020 DC Teacher of the Year. I am going to be collaborating with many stakeholders in our community virtually. And so I am really excited to be collaborating with another DC Teacher of the Year. Her name is Ashley Kearney, and she is the District Teacher of the Year. So we're going to be really working on making sure that teachers have authentic voices at the table when making institutional and systemic decisions during this time. And to continue building relationships among teachers. We want to make sure that even though, you know, there are tensions that exist even within our community of teachers in DC, and this is for anywhere, there's going to be tension associated because all of us have different backgrounds. All of us are different in nature and how we facilitate instruction and how we, you know, view ourselves in the landscape. We want to make sure that at this time we should not be devoting our efforts into further dividing ourselves. We want to make sure that, you know, we're coming together, we're fostering an accountable culture of collegiality and supporting our students and families. And I don't know what the short-term future holds, but I am excited to just play a role as a teacher. I'm so proud to be a teacher, and I'm proud of other teachers working right now. We're really taking it. We are going through it, and just to see how we are performing and rising to the occasion is so inspirational. And I only wish that the community who has never been a teacher or you know, who doesn't have experience in education, I can only hope that they gain an even higher appreciation for what we're doing. And that I don't mean to, you know, I don't mean to come off as boastful or self-righteous in that statement, because we're doing it, and I'm just so proud to be a part of our movement.
It is really dope to see. You know, I left the classroom this year from the outside in, like just the positivity and optimism through the struggle, through the little bit of you know, just uncertainty and fear. I mean, legitimate fear in some cases. Just the optimism that is shining through the educators in our network and the people that I interact with. It really is inspiring. That's the exact right word for it. So right after this conversation, I'm going to talk to my husband about moving to Washington, D.C., just so I can be closer to your spirit. I'm kidding. Just so I can like you can just be like my morning inspiration or something all the time, because you are.
I can do the same for you. I just do Susanna, because I'm telling you that I know that folks are probably like, why do they keep on referencing this?
I know.
Together, because it was, honestly, I'm not even exaggerating, it was life-changing. And you know, so it flatters me to know that you would make such a statement, but just understand that the feeling is mutual. And I'm so grateful that you're taking on this role. And I just really look forward to seeing all the work that transpires. And just thank you.
I love it. I love it. More so, all the love and good vibes to you as you start a new school year. Congratulations again for Teacher of the Year of the state. Oh my gosh, it's so amazing. Thank you for being a part of our segment today and for being a part of our community. LEC community, you heard it here first, I guess, that Justin Lopez-Cardoze, right?
Yep.
Cardoze is amazing. And so follow him on all his things. Stay tuned to us the rest of the week because we still have some things going on. Justin, any last words or thoughts before we hop off?
I'm just so grateful to be a part of this collective. And I really look forward to, you know, exercising more collaboration with folks in the LEC. And just thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Justin. LEC community, have a good night, and we will see you soon. Bye, everyone.